I represent Our Place, which is a group based in Hobart that is steadfastly opposed to the stadium at Macquarie Point. Now, I'm going to make the first presentation in relation to the agreement that was signed on the 3rd of May 2023 by the Premier on behalf of the state of Tasmania. I know this is ground that the committee went over in its first series of hearings and its report, but I want to come back to it because it seems a little bit more is known about it since that time. We have the agreement on the 3rd of May, which was signed effectively in secret and was the product of 12 months of negotiation between the state and the AFL, which committed the state to payments totalling $375 million over the forthcoming 7 years. But that was, of course, based on an estimate. On top of that, the agreement in clause 7.1 provides for operational funding on an annual basis. Again, Tasmania carries that. In 11.3, there's the provision for additional, unidentified at this time, but additional funding. And then there's a further $5 million per year in Schedule 1, page 39. And then we come to the major component of the agreement in clause 21.1, which is the construction costs of $715 million, identified then as an estimate. Nowhere in that agreement is there any room or acknowledgement of the need to project forward the likely or inevitable increases in the cost of building the stadium. In 2023, building projects, because of a lack of resources, builders, engineers, building projects were increasing in cost at around 20% per year. That was known in 2023. Anyway, by clause 20, Tasmania wears all the costs of the high performance centre. It wears all the costs of the stadium construction. So this is not a partnership between Tasmania and the AFL. This is a one-sided deal. Cabinet approved it in September 2022, according to documents before the committee, but we don't actually know what Cabinet approved. Cabinet could not have approved an expenditure of $700 million because that wasn't known at that time. The strategic business case wasn't released until January 2023. And what is very significant is that in the strategic business case document at page 65 is a statement by the author of that document that the funding for the stadium was based on what's described as a request to the Commonwealth for $240 million. And this, of course, unravelled eventually in relation to the GST funds that wasn't there for the stadium. So I ask you to go back and look carefully at page 65, and Richard will speak to that in a bit more detail. So the Tasmanian government is solely responsible for funding of the stadium, and I suggest the committee ought ask itself if it was reckless of the Premier to sign this agreement where there'd been no planning and no accurate estimation of costs. Then, of course, we push the fast forward button to the 2024 election campaign, where the Premier announced a cap of $375 million in capital expenditure that would be put into the stadium by the state of Tasmania. So the position at the time of this statement on the 15th of February 2024 is this. The Premier signed an agreement saying the state is solely responsible for a minimum of $715 million for the construction costs of the stadium, based on $240 million that was meant to be extra to GST, which turned out not to be the case. The risk all falls to Tasmania, and then we end up with the Premier saying on the 15th of February, the state's only putting in a minimum payment of $315 million.
I think you mean a maximum, don't you?
Sorry, you're right, a maximum payment. Yet at the same time, the agreement stands with the government and the state bearing all the costs of the construction of the stadium, however much it blows out. And of course, we've had statements that the cost is being flagged by representatives of the government in their briefings with council at somewhere between $1.4 and $1.6 billion. So the government can't have it both ways. It can't have a maximum amount it puts in, yet it's stuck with this agreement that it's made with the AFL. So the cost overrun is real. I'd like to just briefly point out that the government has not even been able to contain the cost blowout for the expansion of the southern outlet, with a significant shortfall on the $51 million project. Looking around Australia, the $2.7 billion Gabba Olympics rebuild has been abandoned because of the cost blowout and heritage. The Commonwealth Games in Victoria were abandoned because the costs blew out from $2.6 billion to $7 billion. Another major project, Victoria's Westgate Tunnel, blew out in 2021 from $3.3 billion up to $10 billion. I want the committee to be aware of a report from the Grattan Institute released on the 1st of October 2023 looking at infrastructure projects, and I want to quote from this report. They say, "The first problem with doing things in a hurry is that the projects are riddled with risk. Premature announcements and a high price tag are two warning signs that a project is likely to have a cost blowout," and they refer to the suburban rail loop in Victoria. Grattan research shows that bigger projects are riskier projects. Almost half of projects with projected costs of more than $1 billion have a cost overrun, and the average increase in costs is 30%. Projects, and this is the kicker, projects that are announced prematurely are also more likely to have a cost blowout. Major projects are complex. Cost estimates change as the project evolves through first announcement, strategic business case, to planning application, procurement, and during construction. That's all I want to say in my address, but because I'm leaving early, I would like to pick up on a question that was put to the previous speakers, which was, should this project go ahead if it gets the okay from the Tasmanian Planning Commission as a result of the POS process? My answer to that is a resounding no, because the POS process leads to the Planning Commission wiping the slate clean for any planning controls that might relate to this project. That includes height, heritage, location, none of that. By any standard that exists at the moment, this stadium is in the wrong place, is going to cost the community dearly, which other people will deal with, and it should not be built at Macquarie Point. York Park is an excellent option for redevelopment and channeling funds into at a location where which has greater attraction because it's more central. So I'll now ask Richard Flanagan to address you.
Can I just make, just because you're going to go, Roland, you gave us this précis of what had happened over a series of time, and you talked about the Premier saying it was only $350 million maximum. Since then, as I recall, public statements from the Premier, he said that any additional funds required will be achieved through private investment. You would have heard those comments, I assume?
Yep.
Do you have a view on that? He's made that public comment. I'm just wondering, that's in the timeline you were describing.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of statements like that all along the way. We get them for this statement, we get this stadium, we get them for stadium number 2 that's put forward by the Lennon Consortium. The government remains liable for the full costs of the stadium. And until it's built and until these partners are on board, these remain nothing more than statements of hope. And this is a stadium that has very minimal social licence. Large proportion of people in Hobart don't want it. It's going to cause tremendous damage to the Tasmanian budget, and I would be very surprised if private funders would come on board for this stadium for all of the reasons that have been outlined by others.
I've got one quick question too.
Quick one, just because Roland's got to go.
In your presentation just then, you said that government representatives had indicated to council the cost would be $1.4 to $1.6 billion. Are you talking about government department representatives? Can you provide some clarification around that?
I can only go as far
to council?
as saying it was representative of the government briefing council.
Representative of the government?
Yes.
So a department?
I don't know.
Well, you've said it in your presentation. I'm just interested to clarify that piece of information.
Well, I wasn't there, and it's come to me secondhand.
Okay.
But I'm repeating it because it has the authority of the assessments that have been made independently about the likely cost blowout of the stadium. And our architects working on this put the cost at about that point. But it's probably an underestimate anyway, because it doesn't include all these other components such as the sewage works, the transport infrastructure, port redevelopment.
I'm just trying to understand if there's a conversation within government about the costs. That's all. It's not a criticism of you.
I don't take it as a criticism. I just can't answer your question because I wasn't there, and it's come to me secondhand.
Can you direct us to who could answer that question?
Department of State Growth, I would suspect, are the best people to be approached about that.
Okay.
I mean, it's inconceivable. They don't have a current running estimate of the actual cost that this project is going to inflict on the Tasmanian economy. They're going to have to answer these questions before the Tasmanian Planning Commission. Somebody's going to have to answer for it. They have to do another cost-benefit analysis. They need to know the actual cost, and they would have been doing that now.